Tuesday, we devote the show to one particular subject, and this Tuesday it is Iran. A lot of coverage of this country. As with so many nations outside of the United States, when we read about them in the Western media, it's when a crisis or a tragedy occurs. Nuances generally unobserved, and we don't really understand. We'll try our best tonight to put some of that right. A good panel. Forgive me if my pronunciation is incredibly Anglo. Ali Ghiassi, Secretary, Iranian Canadian Lawyers Association. Welcome to you.
Thank you.
Samira Mohyeddin, graduate student, University of Toronto. A great pleasure to have you here. Hussein Derek Shan, contributor, BBC World Service, and known as the father of Iranian bloggers. I'm impressed. And Barman Kalbasi, who's a student activist. Welcome to you.
Thank you, sir.
Do we know anything about Iran in Canada?
I think we certainly know a lot more about Iran than we did just 20, 25 years ago, obviously because of the revolution. But I think in Canada, much of it has to do with the burgeoning population of Iranians in the country. And so, when my parents came here when I was just 7 years old, there were in the early 80s, there were only a few hundred Iranians. Now there are tens of thousands. And as a result, just for that very reason, there is certainly an interest in Iranian affairs in Canada, but certainly on an international level. That issue is an important one.
Did most Iranians come to Canada, or I suppose the diaspora in general, after the revolution?
Most of them did, and invariably they were affected by the revolution. If you look at a cross-section of Iranians in Canada, and I'm generalizing here, but most of them come from the middle class. And so as a result, one would say that they were somewhat affected, detrimentally to some extent, by what happened in the revolution. And although many of them may have been in the streets during the time of the revolution, the results of what occurred afterward, I'm sure, encouraged them to seek to go abroad.
So I assume from that there'd be limited support for the current government in Tehran in the Iranian population in Canada.
I think that's the assumption, but I think the Iranian population in Canada is you can't generalize, and certainly I think it's as diversified as any other population. Perhaps the vocal voices of Iranians in Canada would be against the regime, but I think that there are many people who have certain sympathies about Iran. I mean, at the end of the day, one would have to conclude that there are certain patriotic feelings that don't leave one once you leave the country. And so an attack on a government, when they're called the axis of evil, is from time to time seen as disparaging, not only to the government, but sometimes to the people. And at the end of the day, many Iranian Canadians here have families in Iran, so invariably they are affected by what is said about Iranians and the government.
It's very hard to get a real image of Iran. I've spent a fair bit of time both in Israel and Northern Ireland, and the perceptions of those countries in the rest of the world they're bizarre. They just don't reflect the reality. But we see an Iranian leader who seems to be almost insane. Policies that are very difficult to understand. Is that anything like the reality of living in contemporary Iran?
Well, I can't really say that because I don't live in contemporary Iran. But Ahmadinejad's insanity or alleged insanity is not, I don't think, surprising. I'm sort of bewildered that people are so surprised by this gentleman. The things he says are not new. They're not coming out of nowhere. This is not massive change. I mean, it's quite nuanced in terms of when you go from Khatami to Ahmadinejad, yes, but in terms of the ideological underpinnings of the Islamic Republic, Ahmadinejad is quite, I think, emblematic of the regime.
Really? Do we know what sort of support he would have in the population at large? I know that's very difficult to
Well, he
measure.
was selling himself as a sort of Che Guevara character, right? That, in terms of fixing the economic crisis in Iran, the huge disparity between the rich and the poor, which was one of the selling points of the revolution initially, which has just widened. It hasn't done anything in terms of bringing people more economic stability. So I don't know what sort of support he might have, but I know that in terms of Tehran, for instance, there's different pockets. He might have more support in the south, but if you go to northern Tehran, he's not going to find much support there.
So, growing up, universities and so on, with many Iranians, and again, this is very much a Western view, and it might even be an offensive one in a way, but sophisticated people, illiterate people, sometimes cynical. A man who says the Holocaust didn't happen, even some fairly callow governments in places like Syria don't give that sort of line out. But now this is coming from Tehran. This is very shocking to a lot of people.
Yeah, I don't know. I wasn't really shocked.
Really?
I mean, this government fails to shock me. So I wasn't shocked by his comments. I was embarrassed, disturbed, but I wasn't shocked. And I don't know how much education, Mr. Ahmadinejad has. I know that, for instance, in the education system in Iran, genocide is not taught. There is no such thing as genocide studies, or the Holocaust is not taught. So, it's not something that even the population is quite exposed to. You have to actually do some work to, learn about Birkenau or Auschwitz, or you have to do that work yourself. It's not something that's instilled or part of the education system. His comments, they're embarrassing. I mean, I was utterly embarrassed and felt like I should be apologizing not only to, Jewish people, but Iranian Jews inside the country who, I don't know how they feel when they hear something like this. But Iran tends to, not Iran, but this specific government tends to blur the lines between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. So.
Yeah. Thank you. A lot more to hear when we come back in a few moments on the Michael Coren Show. We'll see you very soon. Don't go away.